It was a great career in Springfield. I want to thank you, Paula, for those very warm and kind words of introduction, saying all those things that most of them I've forgotten about, you know. But it's great to come back again, Joe, to UIC. I've been here many times, and the University of Illinois is our flagship university. My good friend, Dr. Oliver, years ago, we had a talk, and he said, you know, this is a land-grant university. A land-grant university, which means that it's supposed to educate not only those who are attending school, but everyone else in the community should be educated. And so we had a long talk about that. And I want to thank you, Dr. Oliver, for those words of wisdom many years ago. Yeah, I did serve at a great university, the Illinois General Assembly. It is a great university in Springfield. It affords you the opportunity to meet people from all walks of life. It is a place where you meet with farmers, coal miners, educators, lawyers, urban, rural, suburban, all coming together trying to deal with the multitude of issues that you're confronted with in the Illinois legislature. And you learn a whole lot. You go through an orientation session when you first arrive there. They try to give you all the things you're supposed to know as a freshman. And I recall after serving almost a year, and I was at a lounge in the building where I stayed and sitting there talking to just a telephone operator for the state of Illinois. And she told me, she said, you know, in case you have to make a call back home, we have what you call a tie line. And the tie line, you just call this number, and it's not charged to you. We didn't get that in orientation. They're charging it to your hotel or your apartment. The tie line automatically will connect you with any number you wanted back home. We weren't told that. So I learned, and I was advised by a former legislator when I first got there. His name was Raymond Ewell. The best advice a person could give another person going into that situation. He said, listen, don't sit with the guys from Chicago. Sit next to one of those downstate legislators because you pick your seats. That was the best advice he gave me. And I sat next to a fellow by the name of Bill Harris downstate. I learned more about the coal mines, the conditions of that community, how impoverished they are, the things they need. And the more you talk with a person, then you all of a sudden you find out what you have in common. And what you have in common will enable you to get things accomplished because you have an ally. And I did that throughout my career in Springfield. I wouldn't hang around with the guy from Chicago. We all got the same problems. But the guys in suburbia and downstate, I got to know them quite well. And they got to know me quite well. And so through the course of trying to get legislation passed, you develop a friend wherein that person can be supportive. Too often you see folks talking, wanting to give a fiery speech and all those things. That doesn't get anything passed. It sounds good to you, but it doesn't impact on your colleagues. Rarely do a great speech on the Senate or House floor change one vote. And the newer members, I recall in the Senate, one guy came down, he was just ready. And I told him, look over in the press bucket, no one's there. No one's here. You're not changing anything. You might as well sit down. But sit next to someone that doesn't look like you. Get to know a person that doesn't look like you. And when you get to know that person gets to know you, you develop a relationship. And through that relationship, you are able to get many things accomplished. You can emerge more or less as a leader. I was elected the minority leader of the the Senate, in 1993. Minority leader I always call it the Democratic leader because the folks think, you only represent the minorities. But it's a political minority. So I was elected that in 1993. And I recall what the Tribune had to say. This so-called political writer for the Tribune. Prior to my getting elected, there were several who were vying for the position. And he says, Jones does not have a chance because the blacks are divided. What the reporter did not write was, so was everyone else. And I knew if I could unite one group, my group, all I needed was one of the other three groups. And that's what happened. That's how I ended up being the minority leader. I didn't have a chance, as the reporter wrote. And you will discover many things that happened in the past impact on the present as well as the future. Incidents. And you must learn this without being told. Everything you can possibly learn about your colleagues. You must know that. And because those incidents that happened maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, impact on what's happened today. That's the reason why I'm quite sure at this great university, you do teach history. A great historian once said, those who are ignorant of history are doomed to repeat it. So it's important that you understand what happened, be it 50, 75, 100, 200 years ago. The same thing impact in the legislative process. How did I become a leader? My good friend from Southern Illinois, Senator Vince DeMuser, you remember him, Dr. Oliver? He was the Democratic Party leader. And he got voted out of office by one of his Democratic senators who went with a person who was a good friend of the speaker. So hostility exists between those two. They both were running for the leadership position, to be the Democrat leader in the Senate. But there was no way those two groups would come together. And then you had the Chicago contingent. And the Chicago contingent, they're looking at themselves. They all were looking at Mayor Daley for help. And I knew Mayor Daley couldn't do anything. He wasn't going to stick his nose in something that will only hurt him. So he kept his mouth shut. And so when the vote came down, I unified my group. I made one telephone call. I called Vince DeMuser. And Vince said, well, I'll call you back in 15 minutes. He said, I got you 5 votes. That's all I needed. And I became the leader. And folks couldn't figure out how that happened. But what happened in the past, the reason why the downstairs could never get united was that what happened to Vince, what the guy did to Vince, who was also running, they weren't going with this other guy. And they would not come together. But these are the things you must learn. You put them in your bank so you understand all these things and remember them. So therefore, when you're dealing with people and their issues and so forth, it impacts on decisions, be it the present or in the future. It's a great university. I learned so much about downstagers. I enjoyed that. I recall in the city of Chicago, DuSable High School had a program to deal with teen pregnancy. That program we had to codify in state law. And I had the bill, I'm carrying this bill. I went in the Senate Education Committee and presented this bill. I'm getting the hell beat out of me. Until one senator asked one question. He said, "Senator, explain the bill one more time." I explained the bill, and he made one statement. He said, "I certainly wish we had that program in my district, because my district has the highest teen pregnancy of any school district in the state of Illinois." That young man today is the president of SIU University in Carbondale, Glenn Pashard. And when I say getting to know people and talking to people, you would think, listen to me, that all those problems exist in the urban area of Chicago, not in a downstate rural area. But his one statement, you could hear a pin drop when he made that statement. The bill flew out of the committee. The DuSable Campus program. So, and passing legislation is happening in Washington now, attempting to. It's happened in Springfield many, many times. And you must know when the train is getting ready to leave. You must know when to get on board. The former mayor called me when I was flying to Springfield, putting together the votes, and he said to me, "Is it okay if I tell the press I supported you?" I said, "Well, the train's left, Mr. Mayor." I said, "I accept your support, but the train is gone. You had an opportunity to get on board up front." But I said, "I accept your support." Everything. But you must know that in the legislative process, folks want things from their respective community. You got a big piece of legislation. Your vote is being counted on. They need your vote. But if you're smart, you won't let the train leave until you have what you want on the train. Put your stuff on board. Don't sit there and say, "We'll get back to you." No, because the train's not coming back. And once the bell sounds, the vote's taken, your stuff's still sitting on the dock. And it's not always best that you have to be the lead person on critical issues. It's nice sometimes let someone else take the lead. As long as you get it accomplished, as long as it passes, don't always try to be out front. President Obama, people talk about him in Springfield and our relationship. Talk about his bill to deal with ethics reform, campaign financing. And I selected him to sit on this special committee we had to deal with reform, Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate. And he was my point person on this committee. So he's the one who has to come back and describe the legislation. So he came in the caucus meeting, began to explain the legislation, and he got the hell beat out of him. I felt sorry for him. And so, after the meeting, I called, I said, "Listen, you got to compromise. You cannot get the whole ball of wax at one time." I said, "I'm going to tell you what I was told years ago. If you can't get the whole meal, just take a sandwich. And then you come back another time and amend it and keep amending, then you end up with the whole meal." So he amended the bill, and that's the one that eventually passed. But there have been many attempts to change it ever since. Don't always, if you can't get the whole meal, take the sandwich. That's the legislative process. Long as you get something rather than nothing at all. So in a democracy, and what we talk about here, it's best that the citizens be well informed. They should be enlightened. And if they are enlightened, they are easy to lead. But unfortunately, in this country, that does not exist. The citizens are not enlightened. So as a result, they don't know what's good for them, they don't know what's bad for them, so the elected officials tell them anything. It's happening in Washington right now. And a clear example of that. Here I'm talking about, what's the name of it now? They call it Obamacare, the Affordable Health Care Act. You know, when you pass landmark legislation, it usually bears the sponsor's name of that legislation. They're like the McCarran-Ferguson Act. That was a senator or congressman from Nevada, and the Ferguson, I believe, was in the House. But anyhow, it bears that name. That was the law that exempted insurance company from antitrust laws. The McCarran-Ferguson Act. The Hobbs Act. Another federal law. They want to catch a lot of syndicate guys and criminal activity. If liquor is produced in Wisconsin and sold in Illinois and you violate it here, you're in violation of the Hobbs Act. So they call it Obamacare, so health care in this country would from now on would be called, bear his name, long after he's gone. It's law now. But an enlightened constituency, what's happening in Washington, if the constituency in this country was enlightened, you wouldn't have the fiasco in Washington. Many folks do not realize the benefit of the Health Care Act. I fault the administration partly for not educating the public. Those who are in opposition to it, not funding it, they don't give you specifics. They say Obama health care. Am I right? No specifics whatsoever. If they were to give you specifics, then you say, no, I'm for that. Pre-existing conditions, for example. Many persons have pre-existing conditions. They're working on a job. They're afraid to leave that job for another job because they lose their health care. And they will not be able to get health care prior to this new law. Many students who are attending this university can stay on their parents' insurance till they're 25, 26 years of age. They should know this. They talk about, these are blanket statements, taxes. You gotta cut taxes, but they don't say what to cut. The highest rising cost of anything in this country is the Medicaid, Medicare program. You know who that take care of? How many in this room has a relative, a friend, or family in a nursing home? Nobody? Yeah. Now, tell you a little story. How society has changed as a result of laws. When former President Lyndon Baines Johnson passed the Medicare, Medicaid program, that was in the middle 60s. Prior to that, you had a mother, father, uncle, aunt, cousin. They get sick when they got a certain age. You know what happened to them? They simply died. They couldn't go to a doctor. They couldn't get money for medication. They couldn't go to nursing homes. Prior to that legislation, most of the people who were in nursing homes were wealthy. They could afford to pay. That has reversed. People are living much longer. They can go to the doctors. They can get the medication. And they're living much longer. So when they talk about cutting taxes, they're not going to tell you they're going to cut that. They just threw out that blanket. Yeah, I want my taxes cut. Everybody say that. But they will not be specific. If they would be specific, then they would not lose. They would lose support for their programs. So that was happening in Washington today, talking about the health care. If the people really knew about health care, they would not be able to do that. They should know who's representing them. Most people don't. Do everyone in here know that congressman? Everyone know their congressman?
Yes, sir.
I bet everyone does not. I know you don't. They don't. Therefore, and the congressmen know that. That's why they can go to Washington and do what they want to do. If only 50% of the people vote, and all you need is 51% of those who vote to get elected, so you got over 70% of the people that you represent didn't vote with you, didn't vote for you. We do not have an enlightened constituency. They pretend to be, but they're not. When the issues are discussed, you should always look, how does that impact me? Leadership comes from doing what is right. I recall one year Thompson was governor. We passed a surtax increase on income tax. I was at Northern Illinois University on a speaking engagement, and there you got students out there protesting the tax. And not knowing that the student assistance program in the state of Illinois is funded by that tax. Not enlightened. Don't understand. You're a student going here, you're on a Pell Grant, a federal Pell Grant. Federal taxes pay for that. But they're not going to be specific when they say, we're going to cut taxes, too much spending. If you knew that and you were wise and you knew your elected official, what would you do? You'd be on the phone, you call them, find out what's going on. Hey, I want this. But when you don't do it, then that gives them permission to get up there and do all those crazy things. It takes courage. When those students were protesting that tax, and I called some of them aside, I said, do you know, this tax is going to help you go to school. It'll help you with that student assistance program. Oh, we didn't know that. You hear all the talk in Washington about the deficit. They constantly talk about the big deficit. But what they do not tell you, this country was engaged in 2 wars. Iraq, Afghanistan. When those 2 wars started, I think George Bush was president. When those 2 wars started, they cut taxes and used the so-called credit card to pay for those 2 wars. It cost billions of dollars. They should have raised the taxes, not cut. So how can you vote to support the war and another breath come back saying the debt's too high? That's the hypocrisy we have in government. And they're able to get away with it because you don't understand it. And you are not enlightened. So that's why this institute is good, to help educate you as to what's going on. The state of Illinois is going through a fiscal crisis as well. Got to deal with its pensions. I'm a pensioner now. You know, in Washington, what do they call the third rail of politics? That's issues affecting the senior citizens. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and those seniors. They read, they watch, they listen, and they vote. Before they will make a move on trying to cut those benefits, they got to check with the seniors, because they know those seniors are going to be responsive. The third rail of politics, they call it. Don't mess with the senior citizens. So that's why they're never specific when they say cut the taxes. And that is the bulk of the revenue that comes in. There are no free lunches. During my 36 years in Springfield, whenever there was a call for increased revenue with taxes, I voted for it. Because we were not increasing taxes because it's a fun thing to do. The cost of everything goes up. The cost of living goes up. And when it goes up, if your revenue does not keep pace with that, you fall short. And when you fall short, you have a problem. And you have to cut. So I have no problem with taxes. I have no problem when I look at the elderly persons in this country who built this nation and made it possible for many of us. I have no problem in supporting them because they need it. I've seen instances in Springfield where a lawmaker playing to the cheers of the crowd talk about cutting a program in the nursing home and they got a relative in there. That's hypocrisy. And that happens quite a bit. It takes courage to do the right thing. Courage to do the right thing. John F. Kennedy, former president, wrote a book, authored a book called Profiles in Courage. The courage to make that decision. The courage to go ahead and say, this is the right direction we must go. Great book. In school, I had many great books. Best class I ever had, Paula, in school was my humanities class. I learned so much. It helped me throughout my political career. There was a fellow by the name of Nicole Machiavelli. He wrote this dissertation during the Renaissance era. It's called The Prince. He wrote that. When he was in exile, he wrote that. About government over in Italy. He went in with all great intentions of being a great leader. But then he was in exile because he was making too many wrong decisions, alienating too many people. And he proceeded to write this dissertation. He wrote it to tell you how it is. And in order for you to function or bring about changes, you must understand how it is. And he wrote that dissertation. I never forgot that, and I keep that book. Now and then I will go back and read so I don't make the same mistake. Most political leaders like to be loved by their people. But you got a choice to be loved or be feared. You can't always have both. So it's best to be feared rather than loved. Nicole Machiavelli. People have always been known to hurt those they love, but never those they fear. You see it all the time. Never those they fear. You always surround yourself with bright, intelligent people. Because when you do that, you want to judge a person, how great of a leader they are, just look at the people they have around them. You don't have to see the person. If they got smart, intelligent people around them, then you know that person's smart. But if they're dumb, then you know the leader's dumb. And too often what happens is people sometimes in leadership role pick people, they pick a lesson in them to make them look good. That's the biggest mistake one to make. Those are things you learn in this process. And sometimes folks used to ask me, how is it? How you get? It's like being in water, swimming in water, upstream, and the water is infested with sharks. And you swimming upstream. And you have to avoid getting bit. That's how it is in the political arena. Avoid getting bit. But in the event when the sharks do bite you, don't bleed. Don't bleed. Because if you bleed, then some of the other sharks who had no intention of attacking you will attack you. That's how it is in power. As I watched the drama in Washington, and what they've done is they're trying to pass a bill that would cut the funding for the Obamacare. Because a lot of the constituencies are ignorant to the fact, so they can get away with that. Leadership in the House under Boehner, the Speaker, he has a group of individuals within his Republican caucus that won't vote for him to be Speaker if he supports the Obamacare. But he got to be a leader. If he were to call the bill that came over from the Senate, or call the bill, it would pass with bipartisan support. But you got this small group. But a leader must whip them in line. They don't fear him. If they feared him, and he were to call the bill, they have no place to go. So that's what he must do. He's so worried about getting reelected next time by his colleagues. Lack of leadership. And serving in that capacity sometimes is a lonely, lonely road. You have to make the decision for a multitude. It's lonely. And you think you want to do the right thing. I recall we had an issue in the Illinois Senate. It dealt with the human rights issue. It dealt with discrimination in housing and employment for the gay and lesbian community. And I know I was 2 votes short of passing that. So one of my members came to me and he said, I just got a call from the Cardinal here in Chicago. Cardinal George called him telling him to vote against that. I called the Cardinal and I told him, I said, if the Christ that you pray to every day was a member of the Illinois Senate, that Christ would be voting for that bill. And I said, you should not be doing that. Another member came and told me the cardinal called these two books I was trying to get. And I told him, I said, you call that cardinal back and tell him you got to go with the Pope here in Springfield. And the Pope, you got a black Pope here. You got to go. So the bill passed. But those are some of the things that you must do in order to get what you want done. It's been a great, great career. I recruited, I had a very diverse staff in Springfield. I went out personally and recruited a lot of young persons who fresh out of college to be on your professional staff in Springfield. They were all bright and smart. See, people thought I was smart because they were smart, see. And these are folks that does the research, write the legislation for you, do public policy issues and work on, very smart. So when the President Obama came, now President Obama and I knew each other from the days when he was an organizer, when we first met way back then. So when he came to the Illinois Senate, I didn't let my other colleagues know that we had a prior relationship, because didn't you hear more, you know? And you hear all the controversy about how he got there and so forth, and what he did, but that was not really so. So I listened and I listened. So one day after I was elected president of the Senate, he came to see me. And he said, "Boy, you got a lot of power now." And I said, "I do?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You president of the Senate. You got a lot of power." I said, "Brock, tell me what kind of power you think I have." And he said, "You have the power to make a United States Senator." And so I said, "Oh, that sounds good." And I said, we kept talking. I said, "Do you know of anybody I can make?" He said, "Me." And after a while, I said, "That sounds good. Let's go for it." Now, where the term Godfather come in, Paula?
Yes, I want to know more about that.
2 instances. I had all these young people that I brought in as staffers and whatnot. I would meet with them on a monthly basis, sit and talk to them. They were like children. I knew a lot of the parents and whatnot and everything. So, and sometimes they come to my office, I'd be watching the movie Godfather. And so they began to call me Godfather, from a loving, respectful role, more or less, Godfather. They called me Godfather. So I recall I assigned a particular staffer to Brock, and he said, "I don't want to work for him. I don't work for him." And so I said, "No, you're going to work for him." And so Brock had asked him to do something, and he told Brock, "I can't do that. You got to check with the Godfather." And so Brock began to call me Godfather. So when we go through the Senate race, and during the course of that process, I talk about relationships, how relationships are so important. I told him the same thing that was told me. I said, "You want to be successful down here, get to know your legislators, particularly those outside Chicago, and get to know these downstate legislators. And you'll gain their respect and support, and you in turn would be more successful in this body." And so he did that. In the evening, all the guys downstairs, they has nothing to do in a little one-horse town. So they get together, play cards, and do everything. So that's what he did. And when we started that campaign, everybody had their candidate, right? This is my candidate. And what was so shocking to a lot of folks in the political arena, that all across this state, those senators were with Barack Obama. And that due to relationships he built up over time. And one day he came to me, he said, two of these members not supporting it from Chicago. I said, I'll talk to them and see what I can do. And so I called them in my office. And I told them, I said, this election is bigger than you, it's bigger than me, it's bigger than Bronx. It's about our kids. And I said, I, sitting in this role, will not permit it to go down that way. That's all I said to them. I didn't threaten them. and they both got enthusiastically involved in the campaign. Now, which in turn caused Brock to be confused by one of them. He couldn't figure out why this guy is so enthusiastically trying to help him. So he came to me, he said, well, how'd you get him? And from the movie, I said, I made him an offer. And you don't want to know. I often ask people sometimes, describe power, political power. Here's my definition of it. Political power is the ability to have one do what you want them to do against their will. It must be against their will. And that's power. That's political power. Against their will. And that's how it goes down. I told you about J.F. Kennedy's book, Profiles in Courage. And most of you here know about, you read in the press about a lot of people being exonerated from being wrongfully convicted of crimes. That happened quite a bit. So I had put in a Senate resolution to call for a moratorium. And I would talk with the governor, which was George Ryan at the time, constantly about that. And he was a death penalty proponent. And he called me one night and he said, you know how I feel about the death penalty, but I'm going to issue the moratorium in the morning because he said, I'm the last person to decide whether a person live or die on death row. And he said, I don't want it on my conscience that an innocent person died on death row. Now, that took courage. The courage to do the right thing. He happened to be the right person from the right political party at that time. Had a Democrat done it, it wouldn't have been as effective. But George Bush was president at the time. He's from Texas, and the Republicans all against the death penalty. For the death penalty. And for him to have the courage to stand up. That's profiles in courage. The courage to do the right thing. It happened right here on this campus. A student, a few years ago, he either raped and murdered, I believe it was both, a student. And 3 young men from the surrounding community were arrested and convicted of that crime. They spent many years in prison, only to find out with new technology that they were innocent. And they confessed to the crime. This is how serious this is. They confess. That should have told the prosecutors and police powers that something happened that caused him to do that. Those were not scholarly men who wrote the Constitution of the United States or even put forth the amendments. They weren't scholarly, but they understood what happened in the past. The Fifth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is there for a reason. So that a person should not be put in position to testify against themselves. Happens all too often. People look at those great words and say, oh, these are brilliant men. Hell no, they weren't brilliant. Common sense dictate that. In the old country, they used to beat them, throw them in jail. You got to prove your innocence from jail and make you confess to crimes. That's why that Fifth Amendment is there. That must be respected. Profiles and courage. I come to this campus, I look here, I called Phyllis Hayes was working here. And I had been at Northern Illinois University at a great program called the Chance Program out there. That's giving students an opportunity to go to college who may not have a big high ACT score and so forth. They work with the student, they work with the family. Many of these students are first in their family to go to college. And so that Chance Program was so good, so I called Phyllis one day and said, why don't you go out to North and look at that program? It'd be something good for UIC here. And Phyllis went out there and came back here to this campus, and I helped get some funding from the state from the program. And tomorrow, I think next year, they celebrate its 10th anniversary at this campus here. And it gives many students an opportunity to get a college education. They work with them, they work with the professors, class, make sure they're doing their work, and give them all the support that is necessary so they can succeed in college. It's been wonderful being here with you. It's always great to come back to UIC. And as a retiree, see, I watched that pension issue. But one thing I believe is this. You enter into a contract. And a lot of people who work in government these days can make far more money working on the outside. So you enter into a contract. You agree to pay so much of your salary, and the government would pay their share so that you would have a nice little pension when you retire. And that bond should not be broken. The state constitution says so. It is not the participants nor the annuitants' fault that they face with a $100 billion shortfall. It's not their fault. What happened was this. Those in the executive branch have not been putting all the money in as they were supposed to. And that is the unfunded liability. Now, right now, currently, it's costing the state $5 million a day. Because that's a penalty, because if the systems were fully funded, then the system could use that money and invest it and make more to take care of the annuitants. So the legislature got to deal with this problem. It's not the governor's fault. He inherited this problem. And how it's gonna get fixed, I don't know. Just don't mess with my pension. But they have some tough decisions to make. It's not easy, because most of them are scared. they're scared as it relates to all those government employees gonna be on that back if they mess with their pension or try to mess with their benefits. That is the issue that they're faced with. But they should enlighten their constituency so they really can understand what's going on. It has to happen because the clock keeps ticking. And that clock is ticking the way it is. The bonds for the state of Illinois got downgraded. And the money that the state has to borrow got to pay a higher interest rate. And adding up to those billions is $5 million a day. And sometimes the leader got to make a decision, but try to round up all those troops. But it can be done. They got to do it. Hopefully they can come to a court and get it done. Because even locally, they got the same identical problem. But theirs is different than the state. I'm not going to tell you the reason why theirs is different and why they had the shortfall. But then I'm going to start fighting some of these local yokels. But it's much different. You see, years ago, you got Chicago teachers, then you got the state teachers. Two separate pension systems. It should have been one. When they did the 1970 Constitution, the late Richard J. Daley, mayor, did not want Chicago to be part of anything of the state. And Illinois is the only state in the union where you got state and Chicago, two separate entities as related to education. So the people who reside in the city of Chicago pay toward their teachers' retirement system. The people who reside outside the city of Chicago, working for the school district outside the city of Chicago, the state pay for theirs. So the people in Chicago pay twice. They pay through their property taxes for theirs, and through the state taxes they pay for the others. That's not fair. That all go back to the late Richard J. Daley. It should have been one system. Now to try to change it, it should change, but try and change it, the lawmakers who represent the suburban downstate district are gonna fight against that. So those are issues that they gotta deal with. I think I'll stop talking now.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
But now some of you may have a question or two, and I will attempt to answer the question.